I haven't played many miniature games in the past for a very simple reason. I cannot do anything manually. I cannot paint miniatures, I cannot assemble miniatures, I cannot prepare scenery. But the idea of playing miniature games fascinated me. The idea of playing in a three-dimensional, continuous space, that seemed interesting. And recently I found a solution, a pretty simple one, like most solutions are after you figure them out, which is I can just have somebody paint things for me for a fee, and I can just purchase pre-painted scenery. It is certainly going to be more expensive, but at least I'm going to have a gaming experience that I've been wanting to have, and I cannot think of any other ways of having. So I recently started playing miniature games, so there will be reviews about miniature games in the future, intersped with my other reviews, and the first miniature game that I'm going to tell you about is Malifaux. This is the manual, pretty small manual with the latest version of the rules. There's also a larger book that came out afterwards which has the same exact rules that you find in here, but it also has more art, more information about the factions and the characters, more fluff pretty much. Nice book. Malifaux. Malifaux is a skirmish level miniature game set in steampunk horror world, so alternative Victorian times with wizards and monsters and magic and other weird stuff going on. The city of Malifaux is controlled by the guild. They are the law in the city. And the city is renowned for a certain type of resource that it has, the soul stones that are source of power and magic, so everybody wants them, and controlling the stones is one of the main reasons why the factions in the city fight against each other. In fact, there are several factions opposing the guild. There are the Arcanists, that are the wizards pretty much, the Resurrectionists, that do exactly what they sound like they do, which is they mess with the threshold between life and death, the Neverborn, that are the monsters, and the Outcasts, that are rogues, mercenaries, and other type of irregular figures that often affiliate themselves with other factions. Each character comes with a card with all the information that you need to use that character. Here you have a general summary of the abilities and stats of the character, and on the back of the card you have more detailed explanations of what the abilities of the character are. Let's have a look at some of the stats. You have the distance that the character can cover when walking or charging. If you choose the charge action at the end of movement, you can attack with a bonus. Height, so we know how tall the character is, which is important for line of sight purposes. Willpower, this stat is used when the character is, for example, trying to resist magic, or the character needs to resist the terrifying presence of certain opponents. Casting modifiers, those are used to cast spells. Defense, used of course when you're defending in combat. Wounds, the number of health points, hit points, call them whatever you want. When the character goes down to 0, the character dies. And then we have stats for each weapon that the character is using. Actually, I should say the weapon and the ability of the character to use it. So basically, how good the character is at attacking is factored in with the effectiveness of the weapon. If there's Victoria is attacking with her sword, then she will use these stats here. If she's attacking with the gun, there's a series of stats here. Here we have range. If there is the Wolverine's claws symbol, that means melee. Otherwise, with a little gun, that is a range attack. Combat, that's the modifier for when you're attacking, and the damage that that weapon can inflict. There are 3 levels of damage: weak, moderate, and severe. As you can see, the stats are represented by numbers, but they may also have suits, because in order to perform certain actions and to trigger certain effects, you will need to put together a certain amount of points with the cards that you use, but also you may have to combine the numerical factors of the cards with specific suits. As you can see here, some skill checks require a number and at least a card of a certain suit in order to pass that check and to obtain that effect. Then players determine initiative, and the player with the initiative activates one character. After that, the opponent activates another character. You continue like this until all characters have been activated. That completes the turn, and you repeat the turn sequence until one of the players achieves victory. When you activate a character, you can perform up to 2 actions, usually. 2 actions is the amount of actions that characters have by default. And the different actions simply have a different cost. For example, to walk costs 1 action, to charge 2 actions. However, there are other things, other modifiers. For example, characters may have extra actions. This character here has a +1 in melee. She's a melee expert, so she has +1 action, but that extra action is specific, can be used only to launch a melee attack. If she doesn't use it for that, then that extra action is lost. These are the numbers that you see here are the cost in actions to perform the following actions. Also, characters, not this one, but other characters have free actions, 0 actions. So this simply can be taken on top of the regular actions. However, you can only take 1 0 action, 1 0 point action per turn, no more than 1. Also, some characters, such as this one, may be fast, and then they have extra generic actions. So, differently from this extra action here, this extra action can be taken to perform any action that you want. Very important concept in this game is soul stones. They represent magic items that are used for a variety of effects. In Malifaux, you need to provide your own beats or counters or whatever it is that you're going to use to represent soul stones. Each player has a pool of soul stones at the beginning of the game. Each player will also need a deck of cards. You can use a traditional deck of cards, including the 2 jokers, or like I did, you can purchase Malifaux decks, which are just more thematic because they have Malifaux themed illustrations, but regular deck of cards will work. Now, when you are performing your actions, very often you will have to pass what the rules call a duel, which can be an opposed duel or unopposed duel. I prefer to call that skill check. I just find it clearer and less ambiguous. So I'm going to talk about skill checks in this review, but it is what the rules call duels. A skill check is performed by a character against a number and possibly against a symbol, a series of symbols, numbers and symbols being necessary to pass the test to perform the action that the character is trying to perform. If Rasputina, powerful magician, is trying to cast the December's Curse, then she will draw against her casting ability, and she needs to have a total of 14 and a tome, at least a tome. Now, she has a tome already in her casting stat here, and this is why the tome here is ghosted. It is drawn in light lines to indicate the fact that she doesn't need to provide that from the cards that she will use during the skill check. She already has that. In other cases, for example, if she's trying to perform the whiteout, she will need a tome and a mask, but she doesn't have a mask, so the mask must come from the cards. When it is an unopposed check, you are checking against the difficulty of a certain task, in this case a spell. First thing that you do is you draw a card and you add the number and the suit to the total of your original stat. In this case, for example, we have 14, 7 and 7 is 14, we have a tome, that is enough to cast that spell. But suppose that the card that she had drawn was not enough. For example, she had drawn a 1, now she only has 8, not enough. Then there are 2 things that the card trick can do, and you can do one or both. You can replace the card that you drew with a card from your hand. Each player receives a hand of cards at the beginning of each turn, and the size of the hand of cards depends on the size of the encounter that you're playing. Also, there are other factors that may modify the size of your hand, but you play a card to replace the card that you drew, and now you compute the total again. and that may be enough now. There are also cases in which you really want not just to meet the minimum, but you want to go above. Then there are things that you can do too. That is, you can spend a soul stone to play a card from your hand, but this time the card is added to the total, does not replace the previous card. So you can replace the initial card or add a second card. Or actually, you can also do both. This is the unopposed check. If at the end your total is higher than or equal to the difficulty of the task you're trying to perform, then you are successful. Combat is based on the same concept, but simply it is an opposed check. That is, you are checking against the defense of the opponent. At the beginning of combat, both players will draw a card, and they will add the total of the card that they drew to the stat that applies for the attacking card or attack, for the defending card or defense. In this case, the total of Rasputina's attack is not enough to meet or exceed Victoria's total defense. So Rasputina could replace this card with a card from her hand, or again spend a soul stone to add another card. The defender has the chance of doing the same, so basically both players have the chance to modify their initial total. After that, you compare the two totals, and if the total of the attacker is equal to or higher than the total of the defender, the attack is successful. Then at that point you will flip a card to see the type of damage that you inflict. This is a damage flip. In this case, for example, the damage is moderate, so the three possible damages that the card inflicts, you look at the second one: weak, moderate, severe. In this case, 2 points of damage on the Victoria. Those may be modified by her armor. Also, different circumstances will give you modifiers on your attack flip, on your damage flip. Modifiers may be positive or negative, but they still mean that you draw extra cards. For example, if you have a negative modifier of 2 cards, you will draw your card, suppose we are attacking, and then you will draw 2 extra cards. It's a negative modifier of 2. The point is that simply then you're forced to keep and to use the worst card. This would be the card that you would use. If you have a positive modifier of 2 cards, you still draw 2 extra cards, but this time you can choose the best one, which still is not all that great, but in this case you would use the 3, because that would be the best one. So both negative and positive modifiers will still allow you to draw extra cards, but then of course you have to handle the extra cards in different ways. I cannot compare the game to many other miniature games because I haven't played many, but this is a game that I like. I definitely enjoy the setting, the way in which the components convey the theme. Victorian horror is not everybody's cup of tea, but if it is, I think you can't go wrong with what you find in here, because of the quality of the miniatures, and simply because of all the thematic elements that have been created for the system. The action is definitely intense, precisely because characters can do so many different things, interact in so many different ways. And something that I like very, very much is the card deck. The idea of using cards instead of dice. Yes, there's a random factor, but the random factor is mitigated by the fact that, of course, you know what cards already came out. And you know that if you just had a very powerful hand, then maybe the next couple of hands you should be careful, because you may not be able to attack or even to defend effectively. There are 2 jokers that actually have very powerful effects, and they are in fact going to twist fate in completely unexpected ways. No matter how powerful your attack was or how weak your defense was, you may still have a chance. So, I like the mitigated luck factor that comes from the cards as opposed to dice, for example. On the other hand, there are things that made the game a little hard for me to get into. In particular, I'm thinking about the vast number of abilities and characteristics that the characters have and that you have to take into account in order to play the game proficiently. Now, it is easy to play the game. The core rules are pretty simple. What I told you about in this video really is the core of the game. Then everything else is based on variants of these ideas and I would say common sense about movement and line of sight in a miniature world. But even though it is easy to play the game, it is not that easy to play proficiently, precisely because you need to remember about all of these stats and abilities. You're bound to overlook and simply forget some of those the first time or two that you play. After that you remember them, but you haven't figured out entirely how you can combine them, how you can create synergy between the abilities of several characters as opposed to what other characters can do. And I'm just starting to see this after repeated plays, and I think that there will be more plays before I really get a good sense of the strategy. But this is a small price to pay unless you're trying to go to a tournament the second time you play the game, and then you're going to be disappointed because you don't win the game. If you don't mind the learning curve about the strategy, then actually that is a learning curve that is fun to approach, because it is a matter of discovering different and further levels of depth and nuances as you go along, and the game becomes richer, more nuanced, and more fascinating. At least this is my experience, because I enjoy to learn stuff, and I enjoy to learn stuff, of course, in this way, during interesting, fascinating, intense action. The bottom line here is that this is a fun game. This is a very enjoyable game, very thematic, with very solid mechanics, so with very fun, entertaining action that happens all the time. So definitely it is a game that if you're curious about this, about the theme, about miniature games, maybe it is a game you want to have a look at. Definitely it is a game that I'm going to explore more in the future.